Ancient Stones, Skyrim OST. Lothern, Ulthuan. Doomslayer awoke from his rest in his room. It was less a sleep and more a meditative nap. The perks of being blessed by the seraphim made him incapable of feeling neither hungry nor tired. He very much could go on without any basic needs. Hell, pissing was no longer necessary. Though, he occasionally took enjoyment in the minor activities if he had the chance. Just one flex and he could do it instantly. Since last night, the attempted assassination had gotten the inn residents on edge. The guards were pretty quick to get rid of the body before any witnesses had come in. Although, based on the hushed reactions from everyone and Hayden's diagnosis of the body, he may have stumbled upon a species of rat-like beastman. Whatever that meant to him. Still, such rumors that made a fuss around the inn could bring potential intel now that he was here. At the cost of alienating some of the inn's patrons. Whatever the hell their reasons were. Hopefully, Teclis would be there to vouch for him. Doomslayer stood up from his bed and stretched. It had been a long time since he had rested before. His head felt lighter and more relaxed but was still mentally prepared as always. He looked to his surroundings to find himself in a more Spartan but homely room just below the VIP area. He kept his Predator armor on except for his helmet and shoulder cannon, to which he equipped back both on. Rise and shine. Hayden dryly greeted. We have work to do. Knock knock. Doomslayer walked towards the door of his room and opened it to reveal a guardsman standing in front of the doorway. Prince Teclis is here to see you. He has been informed of last night's incident. Thank you. We'll be heading out now. Hayden responded. The guard stepped aside as the Slayer went downstairs to meet up with Teclis. It only took 2 minutes for them to spot Teclis sitting at one of the tables. The Loremaster sighed in relief but revealed hints of worry when approaching. Among the patrons, news of the king's death had spread like wildfire and caused no shortage of sadness for the people. While Teclis assured that it was not his fault, Doomslayer felt slight regret and wondered if it was true. Still, paying respect to the deceased would at least bring him some manner of peace. Greetings, Slayer. I had hoped your evening wasn't too troublesome. I heard what happened and I deeply apologize for not putting enough precautions. Apologies for what? Being attacked? Hardly an issue he could stand by. Hayden remarked. But that's not something you should concern yourself. I believe there's a funeral we should be attending now. Still, my concerns are very much on high alert. Especially in regards to the assassin in question. Teclis replied, lowering his voice to a sudden. But I can't speak further, not while in public. Lead the way. Teclis gestured the two to follow them. They were led outside to see the once quiet city bursting with noise and a diverse scenery full of various races coming together. The streets crowded with merchants and cheerful folk as he assessed. Some looked in the direction of the Slayer as exited. Many were curious as usual, Doomslayer not surprised by this when he entered the city. Many eyed at his armor, dwarves especially were fascinated by it. However, guards soon gathered around them before they could approach him. An elaborate carriage soon stopped in front of them, with Teclis looking back. Tyrion has made arrangements to transport us to the funerary rites. Of course, if you'd like, I can simply use my magic to merely shorten our distance. And considering you are mute, just place your fingers up. 1 for carriage, 2 for magic. Teclis explained before waiting patiently for Doomslayer's answer. Doomslayer thought for a moment before placing a finger up. Hayden answered as if to read his thoughts out. I think he wants to enjoy the scenery for a bit, Teclis. Hayden remarked. Teclis shrugged. Fine by me. I can't blame you for being curious about Ulthuan. Lothern is one of many wonders the island has to offer. Come, perhaps we can discuss more each other on the way. Both elf and man took their seats and enjoyed the scenery around them. Somali. Felice watched as the strange knight left with the Loremaster outside of the inn. The two had taken to riding on a royal carriage and possibly towards the king's funeral. She had been watching them both since they entered the inn. The incident upstairs rattled quite a lot of people, even for her. When he came down, he booked another room after. As it turns out, a Skaven had attempted to assassinate him while he was asleep. It didn't go well if the bloody sack the guards were pulling outside was to go by. Something about his aura felt overwhelming and heavy to her. The air grew cold and unwelcoming whenever he appeared. His posture and movement being angry and intimidating. And behind his helm were eyes full of hatred and bloody vengeance. The only thing that seemed out of place was his voice. It seemed monotone for someone built like a demonic stallion. Still, the deep baritone made up for the oddness. Whoever he was, she was certain that she needed to get out unless she wanted to be in the crossfire. It may have been the paranoia talking, but something about him felt off. Something primordial. She quickly fled the scene and went back to her hideout. It was only a few blocks from where she resided and it was a good place to hide. For a noble. While not much in a way to be considered squalor, the housing was inconspicuous to prying eyes and relatively clean to live in. Still, she missed having slaves beckon to her every whim when she was living in her family's household. But for now, it will just have to do. Arriving at her home, which was a two-story building that was isolated from the more crowded streets of Lothern, she scrounged for her keys and quickly entered. Locking behind with additional chains, she sighed in relief for her safety. She fled back upstairs to her room and locked behind even further. With her thoughts alone, she could finally figure things out. Her next step was to get out of this island without suspicion and then, having trouble, my dear? Felice froze in place as she recognized the frosty tone coming from behind. While not the most demonic sound, it was quite pleasant to listen to. The words that had come out dripped with venom behind a sultry voice. She slowly turned around to see that her mirror's reflection was replaced with the visage of the most powerful sorceress since before the Sundering. Morthy. The hag sorceress of Grond herself. And upon her beautiful face drew a skull. Moments ago. Tower of Prophecy, Nagaroth. Disobey, Odko-tainted love, Marilyn Manson. Morthy sat idly on her throne as she waited impatiently for news from outside of Nagaroth. Her servants had reverted to their usual states. Most of them, at least. Some were less fortunate and died horrifically in terrible and mutated states. And few were taken in by Dracii enforcers to be interrogated. It made her irritable, to say the least, but her thoughts were elsewhere. The slaves at her feet yearned for her attention as they lounged lazily on the floor under the influence of ecstasy and narcotics running in their veins. One kissed her foot in an attempt to appease her mistress. She was met with a shove from her foot into the face, causing her to yelp as she fell on her back. Morthy could only laugh at the girl's little mishap. She stood up from her seat and walked along the corridors of her tower. Several slaves and servants looked up to her with undying reverence as she passed by them. She was the hag sorceress of Grond, mother of the Witch King and the Dracii. All who looked upon her loved her and despaired wherever she walked. And right now, she was in considerable mood to start moving the pieces on the board. She had sent messages, premonitions and even death threats to her spies all over to bring back reports on any of the latest activity. Especially with the recent phenomena that occurred last night. Morthy reached for one of the rooms on the left side. Here, could she conduct her rituals without distractions? The room was used to commit both blood rituals and oversee the world. At the center of it, was a pool meant for cleansing purposes but also to spill blood to rejuvenate her youthful appearances. However, she had her sights on the crystal ball that had been held in place further on the other facet of the room. She glided above the pool and stood before the crystal ball. Placing her hand on the smooth but reflective surface, she began scrying and searched for her answers. Visions began flooding in her mind. Thousands upon thousands swarmed her very consciously. Dangerous it may have been to the uninitiated, but to the hag sorceress, they were nothing more than a slight migraine. However, there were clear images of disorder and anarchy around the world. Many of which involved chaos and its minions slowly descending into madness in the same vein as her pleasure cult followers. Massive infighting and an influx of insanity plagued the minds of every cultist. For the hag sorceress, it intrigued her no doubt, for while she may be in league with the followers of the serpent, Morthy saw it beneficial to abandon here out of sheer self-preservation should the need arise. Just what caused this phenomenon is the question. Indulging in the thought of going into her greatest enemy's territory, she started in Ulthuan. She scoured her sights on the spies supplanted themselves there on both her and Malekith's orders. If the Asur had something special, then she will surely get her hands on it before they could. If she sees something she likes, then she will have it as desired. Scrying more, she finally sets her sights on one individual. Felice of House Mournhurt. Daughter of minor nobility, and one of Morthy's playthings. And from what she can see in the golden-haired girl, she was hurrying to the safety of her home. From what? She'll get her claws, soon enough. Calling her through the orb, she made her presence clear in the girl's mirror, just as she entered her room. Having trouble, my dear? Morthy started as she announced herself. The girl jumped in fright as she heard the frosty tone of her superior. She slowly turned to see Morthy in all her glory and looked with widened eyes before prostrating herself to the floor in front of her. Mother Morthy. Felice stuttered as she did her best to welcome her mistress. Morthy simply looked on bemused as the morsel stroked her ego. Felice looked back up to her properly explain herself. This is a most unexpected visit. I did not know. Silence, little one. Morthy firmly ordered. The girl quickly and obediently shut herself up soon after. The hag sorceress smiled and continued on, all the while looking at her nails. I have been anxiously waiting for any news of the outside world, and yet, received so little information from any of you. Those who bring me trivial news will understand what happened when I'm disappointed. Morthy then turned her gaze towards Felice with cold blue eyes staring through her soul. Tell me, Felice, will you disappoint me? Felice quickly shook her head in fright. And no, Mother Morthy. I serve you willingly and bring news for your ears only. That remains to be seen. Morthy dryly replied. Go on, speak. You're free to speak loudly as well. I have made incantations to make the room soundproof. So spill freely. Felice carefully thought of her next words and spoke up. The Phoenix King, Finneber, has been pronounced dead. The Aesir princes have set up a funeral in the... What? Morthy paused as she heard the news in shock. The Phoenix King was dead? How? When? And why was she hearing this now? Morthy's mood changed to outrage. When did he die? And how? Morthy demanded. He died last night. But no one knows how. And you bring me news of this now. Morthy's voice grew louder in anger at the belated news. Her magic was glowing brighter in response, and Felice began panicking as she realized that she unintentionally slighted her mistress. Word of his death was announced a quarter of an hour ago. It is the truth, I swear, she pleaded. You dare spill more excuses word after word. I have had enough of this. You'll be of good use as red paint on the walls. Wait. There's more. The poor girl cried out. Morthy stayed her hand at the last second, merely within a flick of a finger to splat the girl's innards inside out. She stayed silent on the matter, before making her judgment. Speak. Morthy coldly ordered. The girl slowly calmed herself down as she found her voice. I saw the High Lore Master of the White Tower was being accompanied by a strange man in even stranger armor. He seemed to be some sort of mercenary. Intimidating to look, even. Felice explained. Morthy's hand glowed with magic a bit brighter, causing the girl to reel back in horror. But he looked so different from everyone. And strange about him. He even killed an assassin in his sleep from what I remember. Please. That's all I know. Felice pleaded. Morthy was, at this point, a little skeptical, but let her slights be put aside in favor of digging through the girl's mind. She held back her power afterwards. She gestured her to come closer. Step forward, child of Nagaroth, and place your hand on the mirror. So that I may look through your memories. She commanded. The girl slowly raised hers and touched the surface of the reflection, allowing the hag sorceress to channel her powers. Moments later, she saw the recent memories flowing through her. And what she witnessed was alluring. Morthy saw the strange man in all his glory, and her heart slightly skipped a beat. He stood tall and proud like one of the northern barbarians, but wore something that was neither heavy nor unwieldy, and not ugly to look at if his armor was to go by. Smooth and utilitarian in its design. Only his biceps were the only things left exposed and by the gods, and she could just feel the strength in those arms. She could see the glare behind that exposed helm of his, and it would make Cain proud for carrying such a murderous gaze. Even the way he carried himself was that of a hardened warrior. Everything about him spoke of power and dominance. And she wanted him in her harem. She could just imagine this man rode her like a beast in the heat, his hands gripping around her neck while he pounded her into submission. Oh, if she could get her claws on him, it would make her day. Satisfied with the source laid before her, she quickly let go of her grip on the girl's soul. Felice waited for her mistress' judgment, fearing what fate she will receive soon after. Morthy's lips gave a predatory smile as she set the stones for her next plans. Well, you certainly have proven yourself useful, after all. She complimented, causing Felice to sigh in relief. Morthy soon put on a stoic expression after. However, you will prove it further by spying this night, wherever he goes. I heard he was attending Finneber's funeral. Yes? Felice nodded quickly to Morthy's joy. Good. Find out who he is, and what are his reasons for affiliating with the High Lore Master. Am I clear? Yes, mistress. Felice complied. Excellent. Oh. And one more thing, should you ever get caught, you'll be on your own after. Try to run, and I will know. I will make promise on my early threat. Morthy warned. Felice could only gulp in worry but nodded quickly. Good, off you go. Morthy waved off and disconnected herself from the girl's location. She could just feel the girl relieving herself from the intense conversation she put her through. Quite thrilling, and it keeps the servants on their toes. Though, if memory served, the lore master was most likely responsible for the surge of madness stirring up in the Chaos Warriors. If so, then the night accompanying was no coincidence. And with the gears shifting in her mind, that'll only mean one thing. The Dark Prince. The realm of pleasure. The Pleasure Palace was in terrible conditions by the time things had settled down. The entrance to the palace was completely obliterated to smithereens, several paintings were torn to shreds, furniture was smashed into pieces, slaves were dead either by the demonettes or themselves in a fit of madness, and bottles of the strongest elixirs and alcohol were strewn about in the private chambers of the Dark Prince herself. Here servants were nowhere to be seen, as Slaanesh had shunned them off elsewhere while she drowned herself in misery and liquor. She laid on top of her bed and waited for the alcohol to work its magic. Yet, no matter how many times she drank, none of them worked. Not even the rivers of gluttony were able to sate her thirst despite conjuring the strongest drinks she could think of. Even if she did, it was only temporary, for only the impending doom gnawed at the back of her mind. The Doom Slayer was here. And she was fucked alongside her brothers. And not in a good way. In any way, even. By now, the others were probably going through the same motions as here. Except maybe Korn. That idiot seemed to be having a blast by now based on the different energy flowing from his realm. Less angry and more happy. That was a first in a long time. By now, Slaanesh was setting up a bucket list of things she wanted to do before she got a brand new asshole put in place by that monster. Like maybe go sightseeing, meet new people, eat good food, sleep with said new people. Scratch that. None of those things mattered, either way. She was fucked beyond relief. Knock knock. A knock from the door stirred her awake, much to her dismay. What is it? She asked, derisively. The door opened, and Slaanesh threw an empty bottle in anger. The person behind it yelped in surprise. I didn't fucking say to come in. She lashed out. The servant behind the door wisely thought best to speak through the door. You have a message, Dark Prince. The Hag Sorceress of Grond would like to speak with you. The servant replied. Slaanesh groaned and proceeded to get up from her stupor. She pulled out a pink bathrobe and walked towards the door. Opening it revealed a dainty and quivering demonette. The servant looked on in fear as Slaanesh glared at her with utter disdain. And you thought that I would be in the mood to do so? Or that maybe you could have sent a keeper of secrets to speak with her in my stead? She questioned. The demonette could only stare in utter silence, as she tried to think of a proper explanation to hear. Slaanesh simply kicked her hard in the stomach, launching her into the air and crashing into a window, before plummeting to a pink grassy area outside of the palace. With plenty of broken bones. But still alive. If barely. The Dark Prince howled in rage afterwards. If someone dares to disturb me again, you can bet your asses that I'm putting all of you through sensory deprivation for my amusement. And please someone speak to that elven bitch. I'm not available. Slaanesh threatened throughout her realm, instilling fear in her servants. Demonettes and keepers of secrets steered clear of her home but obeyed her every demand. Slaanesh slammed the door to her room and went back to her alcohol-induced coma. Tower of Prophecy, Grond. Morthy awaited expectantly of her master as she stood before the pool. It had been about 5 or 6 minutes of waiting impatiently for the demonette to return with answers. She did find the demon to be oddly fidgety and quiet. But since she had power over her and could care less about her worries, she just brushed it off. Moments later, an apparition appeared before her. This time it was a keeper of secrets. The towering pink hermaphrodite looked at Morthy with a surprisingly tired expression. Heavy bags under her eyes and graying hair were quite telling. Yeah, what do you want? The keeper rudely asked. Morthy was incensed by the seemingly blunt tone she received from an otherwise affable Slaaneshi demon. Mind your tongue, demon. I am the Hag Sorceress of Grond and you will both address me by my title and acknowledge my power. And I requested to speak with the Dark Prince, she retorted. The keeper could only react with apathy at Morthy's claims. Tisk. You are in no position to make such demands. The keeper replied. Our mistress is every bit unavailable as we speak. However, she is kind enough to send a representative such as myself to do business with you. So forgive the impolite behavior. A lot of has been distressing for all in the Dark Prince's realm. Morthy raised an eyebrow at the last words. Was it that bad in the Chaos realms? She shrugged it off, however, and immediately made requests. What can you tell me about the night in Ulthuan? The one with the High Lore Master in Lothern? she asked. The keeper gazed with horror. She leaned in closer and hushed her warily. Shh, not so loud. Are you insane? I could get skull-fucked because of your curiosity, the keeper harshly whispered. Morothy narrowed her eyes with indignation, but the keeper quickly changed her tune and explained carefully. Look, if you want to know, then so be it. Morothy beamed with satisfaction, but the keeper rolled her eyes in annoyance. The man you speak of is a dreaded figure among the realms of chaos. Uttering his name is enough to terrify the others even from a distance. His reputation truly exceeds even the most legendary figures of the past. Even your husband. While he was never mentioned out loud, Morothy was fuming at the mere mention of Inarian. He was her most precious memory besides their son, Malekith. So the feeling of his name being insinuated was insulting to her. Say his name, and you will soon meet him. Morothy threatened. The demon, however, continued. Fine. Have it your way. Regardless, the man is a titan of ancient pasts. For eons, many of our legions were felled beneath his blade. Forever lost to us in his vengeful crusade. Champions and lords fought with all their might, only to be cut down mercilessly against him. He was the black tide that attempted to swallow us all. But our counterparts, the legions of hell, devised a plan to seal him deep within their dark catacombs for an eternity. While it may have been reassuring, Chaos decided that it was better to cut ties and seal ourselves away from them as far as possible. The legions of hell? Who are they? Morothy questioned. She never heard that name before. Nor did she recognize other beings outside of the known chaos gods as well. Old associates of ours. Probably long gone, by now. The demon simply answered. And chaos was correct in their predictions. And now, we are royally screwed. Mark my words, dear sorceress, the man you are looking into cannot be persuaded, reasoned with, or begged, for he does not care. He is the scourge of God, and he will bring ruin to all. And even now, the hordes of chaos has gone mad. Only Khorne's chosen remain stable and march onward. The scourge of God, you say? Not gods? Just a god? And what of Khorne? Morothy questioned. The demon could only shake her head impatiently. There are many gods outside of this mortal realm, Drachii. And few are even more powerful than others. As for Khorne's, well, I can't reveal such. Morothy remained silent, but more and more hungry for the knowledge bestowed upon her. But first, before we go further, you will reveal what of the blood god's plans. Or your master will be the last person you want to anger. The demon eyed her, accusatively. But relented, eventually. Fine. The Khornets are coming to attack your lands as we speak. But that wouldn't matter. They will be the least of your problem. Coming from someone scared of a boogeyman. Morothy remarked. Speaking of which, you barely speak of the stranger's name. You speak in riddle and I want a straight answer. Morothy demanded. The demon stared at her with obvious disgust. As I said, I cannot say it out loud, for it carries dread for all to hear. However, I have no issue spelling it out. But once done, I will break contact with you for my safety. We never had this discussion. Yes, or else your skull will be violated and so forth. Just spill it out already. Morothy impatiently demanded. The demon showed no amusement in Morothy's tone. So be it. The demon said, and then snapped her fingers immediately after. Enjoy your search. Communication soon broke off as the demon vanished from Morothy's sight, and purple magic began glowing in front of the sorceress's eyes. The light soon dissipated and revealed her wall had been carved with writings on it. Only a name. Doomslayer. Morothy's lips curled up with dark joy. Might, what will I do with you, brave knight? Kyne's Peace, Jeremy Soule. Lothern, Ulthuan. The trip had been steady so far. Not exciting but not boring either given the green environment around them. Doomslayer watched the scenery slowly transition from concrete walls and cobblestone streets to lush green forests and hills as they ascended towards the hilltops above Lothern. Teclis and Hayden kept themselves busy conversing with one another over trivial things like technology, history, and science. Teclis seemed enthusiastic in learning about the humans on Earth, to which Hayden was more than happy to share in exchange for the use of magic. Of course, if Hayden still had his body, Doomslayer would have been more comfortable writing in silence as he watched the landscape shift around them. But that wasn't the case, and he was trapped listening to a bunch of nerds talking nerd stuff. Fortunately, the ride was short, for the horses stopped in their tracks as they arrived at the funeral. They exited out of the carriage and Doomslayer scanned the building before him. It was an elaborate cathedral that stood out like a sore thumb. The architecture was styled in Gothic Revival, and done in painstaking detail. The placement of it overlooked the entire city. Like everything in Ulthuan, it was huge. And it was kind of expected for a race of such grandiose. Elves were elves, really. Teclis began leading the Slayer along with the guards inside. I must admit, Dr. Hayden, you impress me more and more with your knowledge. I dare say, you may have surpassed the College of Magic or the Asur with such an intellect. It would be a valuable asset for the world if you're willing to share it. Teclis remarked. Of that, I can agree. In exchange for the inner workings of magic, of course. Hayden replied. Those are acceptable terms. Teclis continued to lead them to the entrance. A guard greeted in respect. Greetings, Prince Teclis. Your brother is expecting you inside. As is the king's family and the princes attending. Much appreciated. We'll be heading our way in now. Teclis replied. The men entered and walked the halls as they headed towards the king's final resting place. The halls were vast and gigantic enough that it could have been the home of giants. However, the atmosphere was very solemn. Silence would have deafened the halls were it not for the footsteps. The group arrived before the room that was to be held. Teclis stopped and gestured the guards to leave with just the two of them alone. I should probably mention that there'll be a lot of mourners inside. The Ever-Queen, the king's daughter, my brother, other princes, dwarfen and human ambassadors and plenty of nobles in there. I would suggest you remain quiet at this hour, Dr. Hayden. Doomslayer, of course, is exempted given you are, well, a man of silence. Teclis detailed. Doomslayer shrugged while Hayden replied with manners as usual. Understandable. Teclis then gestured the guards at the door to allow them passage. Upon entering, Doomslayer walked alongside the prince as they head closer to the seatings. A mourning crowd was entirely focused on their king as, presumably, the priest continued his speech before the two passed the first row. And then did the silence break. Just as it did back at the inn, the crowd soon focused their attention on the Slayer's appearance. A lot of heads at the front turned back as they saw him walking alongside the prince, while those behind began whispering about his appearance. Some were fascinated by the designs and a couple of dwarfs wanted to approach him about it later. Others, however, were less welcoming. Accusations of him being an uncouth mercenary were the norm as they moved. And fewer were accusations of him being a warrior of chaos. Given how outlandish he looked, Doomslayer took it with a grain of salt. As they got closer, the princes and what was presumably the Ever-Queen and her daughter stared at the Slayer like deer in headlights. It was quite comical to see them gaze at him like a new animal placed in a zoo. They all quickly stared back at Tyrion, who was the only one who didn't look surprised by his brother and his guest's arrival. Instead, his expression was that of outrage and annoyance as before. Very befitting as warm greetings go. Teclis guided him towards his guest seating and left him to be alongside the other princes. The others kept staring at Doomslayer with apprehension but soon turned their attention to the lore master himself, and quickly avoided staring at him as Tyrion glared back at the princes. The Ever-Queen looked at Tyrion with assurance and serenity and all soon focused back to the king laid before them. And then after, it was full of prayers and sermons and so forth. This was going to be a while for Doomslayer. South of the Chaos Wastes, towards Nagaroth. The Cornets and the Chaos Warriors ran down south to where Nagaroth was. Where they will plunder the Dark Elves of their slaves, their riches, and their glory. As promised by the Averkazan. They have been marching tirelessly since the dead of night as ordered by Vakia the Bloody, who marched alongside them. Accompanying them was the famed Wulfric the World Walker and his Norscan raiders. Wulfric demanded that he accompanied the followers of the Hound to seek out battle early. The Averkazan was surprisingly gracious and allowed him to partake in the battle against the Dark Elves. Now, their combined forces was enough to take the Drachii by force and push them towards Alfheim. Once done, it was only a matter of time before the elves began killing each other for their homeland. Many of the warriors grew eager as they marched closer to their prize. But for the Gore-Queen, this was not enough to sway worried thoughts. Since leaving the Realm of Blood, Vakia had been contemplating about the dangers ahead. Her husband's warnings occupied her mind, as of late. The dreaded feeling that this individual could potentially stop the gods blocked all other thoughts. Yet, history has shown that even the gods could be afraid. The first Phoenix King known as Inarion once held a sword said to have brought terror to the warriors of chaos in a past age. Nagash the first necromancer desired to cut the threads from chaos by turning the world into a realm of the dead. And the first emperor of the weak southerners, Sigmar Heldenhammer, turned the tides against the legions by destroying a champion of Khorne, along with other feats, and carving out an empire out of it afterwards. Fortunately, all vanished from the face of this world. Whether dead or simply disappeared to parts unknown, chaos stood unopposed, an enemy without. So naturally, this warrior of unknown origins was simply just another would-be slayer of chaos. It should be no problem. Or could it? Something troubling you, Gore Queen? Valkia's thoughts were broken as the World Walker's voices invaded her private thoughts. Wulfric looked at her with some concern. Although, he hid it well behind his usual joyful personality as he smiled that wolfish grin of his. Valkia scowled at him for disrespecting her personal space. Mind your business, Wulfric. Concern yourself for your own safety. Would be a waste to destroy your raiders before we arrive because you questioned me. Valkia warned. Wulfric smirked but backed some distance. Just making conversation is all. Wulfric excused. Besides, you haven't been yourself, lately. Been awfully quiet when the army needs to hear the roar of the Gore Queen flying over them. To be frank, the Cornets haven't exactly been themselves, either. And what makes you believe that, World Walker? Valkia furrowed her brow with an accusative tone. Seriously? Look at your men. Wulfric raised a thumb and pointed it over his left shoulder. They've been as silent as rocks since the incident up north. Some of my men had almost been pissing themselves out of fear, preferred that they started screaming blood and skulls than be so damn quiet. The gods saw fit that the berserkers be focused in their battle against the Dark Elves. She lied. Wulfric saw through it and bellied out a mocking laughter. Ha! Never took a follower of the Hound to be a good liar. If the gods did see fit for your warriors, then what of the other followers? The serpent, the raven, and the crow? Those three have been out of their damn minds, crying over spilled milk or something. Not like the hounds. No. There's something afoot here, and you're hiding it. He leaned in closer, but not enough to be considered threatening for Valkia. Still, she kept Sleipnir by her side and made careful planning to use it before Wulfric could overstep the line. What did you find from our blood god? What answers did you receive when you've arrived upon his throne? He questioned. Valkia was glaring daggers and clenching her teeth at being scrutinized by this lowlife. However, restraint had been the better master to her and told her to at least be reasonable about it. To a degree, however. When was the last time chaos had been stopped before? Valkia asked. Wulfric paused and opened his mouth but no words came out of it. He scratched his dirty red beard to try and remember but came out with nothing. I'm not exactly good with history, you know, but care to elaborate? Valkia could only shake her head at her fellow Norseai's ignorance. Since Magnus the Pious defeated our last Everkazan, Avazarkul, which was almost 230 years ago. That long, eh? Wulfric said, now scratching his head. Been a while since we've gotten a new Everkazan. But that really hasn't stopped our people from raiding the south, has it? No, not really. She agreed, before answering reluctantly in hushed whispers. But there is a new power. One that could potentially destroy us all. So a challenger? Well, they can get in line once I've taken the skulls of other champions. Wulfric casually boasted. You may be right. But Khorne has made it clear that the gods are afraid. Valkia further explained. Something about this man has made an impression on every god. Khorne is pleased, however, but not so much for the others. So you're saying this southerner has put the fear in the gods? Interesting. Wulfric looked intrigued by this. However, Valkia was not amused at all by his interests. Don't even think about it. And by Khorne's words, he is no southerner. Far from it. Wulfric looked surprised but kept quiet. He is not from here, but from another realm. A time when the gods were truly powerful in their infancy. And he has come to bring wrath and ruin to us all. Valkia finished. And now we are to conquer Alfheim soon after the Dark Elves are destroyed in order to stop this man. Valkia finished. Wulfric looked on with a mix of emotions on his face, but his smile prevailed and revealed his intent. So, another worlder, eh? Finally, a skull worthy to lay claim for the gods. Don't even think about it, Wulfric. Valkia warned. We don't even know what kind of power he holds, so you best stay clear of him. And not a word gets out between the two of us. Do so, then I'll start raping your arse with Sleipnir. Understood? Could have been more gentle about it. Maybe share drinks first before we get to the action? Wulfric jested, much to Valkia's ire. The wanderer took notice and backed down. Relax. I'm simply lightening the mood. And don't worry, your secret's with me. The World Walker winked and soon departed to meet up with his raiders, leaving Valkia to her own thoughts again. Guide my blade, beloved. King Bran's final voyage, The Witcher 3 OST. Lothern, Ulthuan. The funeral ended surprisingly early than expected. The king's remains were moved back to the city where it was placed on a boat and drifted off to the calm seas before being lighted by fire by an archer offshore. The mourning is over. All of Ulthuan is grateful of your attendance. However, we will have to cut this ceremony short, immediately. Mourn and give condolences in your homes. The Phoenix Court shall now begin an assembly at the Parliament. Thank you and goodbye. Teclis' voice rang the air as he announced the following events. Many of the denizens looked confused, including the princes. However, all dispersed quickly and moved on with their lives. Doomslayer was waiting nearby with a couple of Teclis guards behind him. By this time, it was still noon. The ceremony was done rather hastily. However, not many were expecting the king to die so sudden, and with the way the end times were coming so soon, so it's not hard to see the sickly prince be in a hurry. All the princes soon gathered and walked towards the parliament in haste. Teclis approached Doomslayer and shooed the guards away elsewhere. Well, this is far from over. We still have more matters to deal with. Usually the paperwork politics the princes seem to enjoy. Teclis grumbled. Doomslayer crossed his arms in both annoyance and disapproval of having to waste more time. Hayden spoke his mind out. That is hardly an important matter to deal with. He is here to destroy the daemons, not sit through bureaucracy. How much time must be wasted before it is too late? Stop the end of the world? Hayden questioned. Teclis could only shake his head in annoyance. Had it been a normal time, usually 30 days. Teclis approximated. Doomslayer furrowed his eyebrows behind his visor, giving the prince a clear view of his current mood. That is time we don't have. It is now or never. Hayden pressed. And I agree with such an argument, believe me. But arguing with these princes is like trying to punch a wall. Their egos are simply that hard to break. Well, not hard for him. Hayden countered as he pointed Doomslayer as an example. Of that, I'm well aware. But the pen is mightier than the sword, as your human sayings go. Teclis remarked. Unfortunately, there is truth to that. I won't order you to be my lapdog, mind you, so you're free to do as you will. However, making a good impression among the princes is a start. Then again, you have a sort of rebellious streak about you. Teclis assessed. Doomslayer shrugged, pretty much apathetic about politics. Doesn't care, really. Hayden answered. Teclis smirked, then gestured Doomslayer to follow. Phoenix Court. This is unacceptable. Expect us to consider action with a on the verge of collapse. If we don't, then we shall call in vote. Our king has just passed and now you're Alria. Doomslayer stayed behind the scenes as he listened on the sycophantic rantings of the princes arguing over who was going to be the next king. Not even a minute since entering and they all started going at each other's throats. Doomslayer was not one for politics. He lived a soldier's life. Before his first life came to an end, he was a Marine. He was trained to be the best soldier on the field, and a damn good one to boot. His training saved him more times when the first Hell invasion came. And this was all before he became a Night Sentinel. Still, politics got in the way as usual. Only this time, the politicians were full of knife-eared pricks. He would be glad to just go back to Hell and finish his job, then be here all day. Teclis looked tired and slammed his staff into the floor, causing a burst of magic in the room, grabbing everyone's attention. That is enough. All of you. Teclis declared. I understand that this is a stressful time we are living in, but we must put all our attention in the next step forward. Finnebr has written his will before his passings and we must now honor them. And how exactly did the High Lore Master receive such a will? One prince questioned. The prince was a remarkably brunette among an otherwise blonde-haired crowd. He wore a mixture of gold and white-colored armor with a dragon heraldry. The air around him reeked of ambition and pride. It is rather suspicious of you to keep one right after the king passed. Tell us, were you going to use it as leverage to have us all kowtow if you were declared Phoenix King? Or was it your brother that you would support whom you lived under his shadow? He continued. Tyrion was livid to hear those words and struck back. You dare insult my brother as if I'd use him as a puppet, Imric. You speak proud and mighty, yet show no proof of it as you hide behind your dragons while you sing to them. So we'll settle this with a duel. Unless a Kaldorian like you is too much of a peacock to even prove himself worthy. How dare you? The prince, now identified as Imric, yelled in retaliation of Tyrion's insult. The crowd grew into an uproar as both princes were ready to draw swords out. However, Teclis and another prince stood between the princes. Enough. This bickering is going nowhere unless we focus on pressing matters at hand. The third prince said. He was, for one thing, tall even by elven standards. He was quite huge and easily towered the other princes. His armor stood out as it had the coat of a lion strapped over his left shoulder like a cloak. Doomslayer would have mistaken for another human were it not for the ears. Captain Korhal is right. Teclis answered, shooting down the Korhal's presumed status. We cannot make progress unless we cease further tension within the court. But what Imrik speaks of is valid to a degree. I did receive Finneber's will shortly after his death. However, he entrusted me to ensure that his will had been fulfilled under certain conditions. The princes around him were whispering among themselves as he explained himself. Imrik hinted smug underneath that smirk of his. His judgment was true. For now. What did his will entail? One prince asked. Teclis paused a bit before speaking to the crowd. His first task was to bring Malekith, the Witch King of Nagaroth, to be brought to Ulthuan and be put on trial for his crimes against the Aesir. Teclis answered. This was met with disbelief and skepticism as the crowd scoffed at the impossible task set by their king. Tisk. Unlikely to ever happened. Imrik responded, to which the princes agreed. No one has ever dared bring Malekith to justice. He is a powerful sorcerer, and one who will not easily go down without a fight. And let's not forget the army he controls, the Drachii. Imrik looked to every prince without a hint of hesitation. Since the Sundering, these savages divided our people for the sake of power, slaughtered our own in the name of their king, and plotted for years and years endlessly until Malekith finally takes his birthright as Phoenix King. Even if he was brought here, then how can we ensure that he is restrained without his power? The princes unanimously agreed with the Kaldorian. Teclis, however, remained impassive and continued. King Finneber had already made a contingency plan to see it through. Which is why he added another task to his will. What was the other, Prince Teclis? Korhal asked. Teclis looked back at Doomslayer, who was leaning back on one of the pillars of the court and gestured him to appear before the crowd. Doomslayer stood back up and walked to the center of the assembly. Many backed away as they noted his intimidating visage and approached towards them as Teclis gestured. Doomslayer stood next to the Loremaster and looked around the room as the court began whispering amongst themselves. Presenting to the Phoenix Court as our solution, Doomslayer. Along with his unseen companion, Dr. Samuel Hayden. Teclis announced. The court looked to themselves suspicious by his overall appearance. However, Hayden spoke up to silence the crowd. It is an honor to be among proud people. Hayden greeted. The crowd continuously whispered among themselves. Imrik smirked as if humored. This must be some sort of odd jest you have, Teclis. Imrik taunted. How do you expect me to take this stranger seriously when he's not even a dwarf? He has little in common with them save for the title. Just where exactly is the hideous beard and ugly haircut? Some of the court members laughed to themselves. Doomslayer tilted his head in confusion. No idea what you're on about, Prince. Did a dragon drop you on the head as a child when you were on your first flight? Clearly, much of it hasn't been there since. Hayden retorted. Imrik was taken aback by Hayden's surprisingly quick, if childish, comeback. It was enough to anger the prince, though. Much to Teclis' delight. You dare insult the Prince of Caledor in front of the Phoenix Court. Such slander will be punished severely. Imrik threatened. And what will you do? Punish us with a song of ice and fire? Didn't do so well, last season. Hayden retorted, which, while confusing for the court, only infuriated the Dragon Prince even more. Teclis was quick to step in front of Doomslayer, despite being more than capable of defending himself on his own. You will not bring harm to this warrior, Imrik of Caledor. Teclis issued. It is by the king's final will that the Doomslayer is to bring the Witch King to Ulthuan. Any who object will be directly going against the king's final orders. The crowd began to talk among themselves, shocked by this new development. Imrik, however, soon backed off but remained contemptuous for the duration of the assembly. Doomslayer could see Tyrion surprisingly pleased by Hayden's saving grace. Many stared at Doomslayer with apprehension, initially. However, Korhal was the first to speak up. If what Teclis speaks is true, then it is our duty to uphold our king's will. Any objections? The court grew silent. Wary, but unobjective. Teclis beamed with relief. Korhal looked back at the Loremaster. Then I suppose we would want a proper introduction from your companion. Korhal suggested. The court then looked to their new visitor. Doomslayer was a man of no words. Hayden, on the other hand, was the opposite. I am Dr. Samuel Hayden, and the man that stands before you is the Doomslayer. And we have come from another world. To save yours. More boring exposition later. After Hayden finally finished sharing stories and exploits, there was a mixed bag of reactions among the court. Some were slightly invested in Hayden's scientific discoveries and technological benefits. Not to mention just how revolutionary Hayden was, considering that has now transcended from his physical form to something entirely unseen yet present as a mere voice, as well as perhaps allowing Doomslayer to be in their auxiliaries. While others remained skeptical and hesitant about Hayden's research and the Slayer's abilities. And a few like Prince Imric scoffed at them for being nothing more than charlatans. It wasn't Hayden mentioned the demons invading Earth did the court went silent. Many wondered just how large the invading force reached beyond their existing world. Some have even taken to reconsider aiding Hayden, if only a tad bit. But for Doomslayer, it was finally over. He was sick of standing in the middle of that room. Being gawped at like some sort of newly discovered fossil hardly fazed him, but just trying to remain still was agonizing. Fortunately, the court had finally been put to rest and the princes were left to their own devices. Tyrion, Teclis, and Corhul were the only ones left standing besides Doomslayer. I must admit, Hayden, your world is vastly superior compared to the humans here. Maybe more so than ours. And you definitely shut Imric up for once. Corhul complimented. Thanks. We have been on a long road to making progress without the help of dwarves and elves. And substantially evolved far more than our counterparts. Still, I find it hard to believe that neither our peoples nor the dwarfs exist in your reality. They didn't go extinct, did they? Corhul asked, slightly concerned. Negative. Only humans have ever existed. And so did magic. And yet, you managed to be every bit resourceful in regards to your engineering and revolutionary inventions. Teclis regarded. The most advanced we've had is the use of steam-powered engines and gunpowder. And that's humans alone. Which is telling that you are a threat to Ulthuan. Tyrion added, much to his brother's displeasure. Even if it is true, the last thing the Aesir needs is another great power to rival us besides chaos. In other words, it only justifies my distrust for allowing you two to be welcomed here in the first place. Your faith in us is truly astounding, Prince Tyrion. Hayden dryly remarked. You do forget, with the legions of hell attacking Earth, we are far from committing war crimes against this little island, and by the extension the rest of the world. It would be beneficial to combine our resources and commit to diplomacy rather than conquering another world. Tisk. That remains to be seen. Tyrion scoffed. I have had enough parleying with you today. I'm off to serving other greater purposes. This discussion is over. The prince exited out of the room. Teclis shook in disapproval while Corhul waved offhandedly. Bah. Don't let him get to you. Corhul assured. He can be a real pain in the ass, but he's a damn good fighter, that one. Saved all of Ulthuan. And especially the Everqueen. The White Lion casted a wink back at Doomslayer, prompting to raise an eyebrow. Besides, he's practically nicer once you meet Iltharion. So we've been told. Hayden replied. Corhul casually shrugged. Well, at least you're well informed. But as much as I like to continue on, I also got business elsewhere. Take care, Slayer. Loremaster. Farewell, Corhul. Teclis replied, with Corhul exiting the court. Doomslayer looked back at Teclis, waiting for what he had to say. I hope that's the end of it. If I had my old body, I probably would have felt long-winded with that entire speech. Well, actually, there's just one more thing that I have to do. Teclis responded. Doomslayer could only throw his hands in the air in frustration. However, Teclis was quick to explain the predicament. Wait. Allow me to finish. Teclis urged. I haven't exactly told you everything about the assembly, and it is rather repetitive of me to do so, but it will relate to your next goal. Do tell. Hayden said. Teclis straightened himself up a bit before sharing. As it was last night, the Loremaster summoned a dome over them to block contact outside. While I was sending word to the princes, there was one in particular that I've tried to make contact with. His name is Alithanar, or the Shadow King, as he goes by nowadays. He's currently waging a guerrilla war with the Drachii and Nagarythe, blocking their means of access. Most of the time. Nagarythe? You mean Nagarythe? Hayden asked, genuinely confused by the mixed names. The former, actually. Nagarythe is a kingdom of Ulthuan. Nagarythe was named after the former homelands of the Drachii. They were once allies with Ulthuan before the Sundering happened. Now, it's nothing more than a land full of swamps and death. What's left of the kingdom is comprised of specially trained Aesir known as Shadow Warriors. And Prince Anar happens to be in command of them. And he'll be our guide, am I correct? Indeed. He knows more of the Drachii territories than any other Asur. Even myself. However, it will take some time before my message gets to him, it seems. Which means you won't be staying here, fortunately. I can send some guards to escort you out. Actually, before we go, there's one question I've been meaning to ask. Back at the inn, an assassin attempted to kill him in his sleep. However, my diagnosis of it revealed to be a rodent. Any idea what it is? Hayden questioned. Teclis sighed in irritation, but not towards the question. A skaven, or ratman in the human tongue. Nefarious little beasties that plague all over the world. Cowardly but vile creatures who have caused untold horrors to the surface world. Their vast empire is beneath our feet as we speak. Sadly, many have scoffed them as urban legends. It's especially notorious in the Empire of Man. The lowborns are ignorant of their existence while the Emperor and his entrusted advisors do their best to suppress it in order to avoid societal collapse. A conspiracy detrimental to the well-being. Hayden remarked. Better than outright disorder. Teclis countered. I would rather have them alive than be one ally short of a defense against chaos. However, they're not the only ones who are being plagued by them. The dwarfs wage war with them on a constant basis. I even heard about a three-way war between the dwarfs, the night goblins, and the skaven. And in the south, the lizardmen continue to fight them as we speak. Heed my words, never underestimate them. They are just as dangerous as the endless horde of chaos. You might want to put them on your radar. The assassin was the first of many. This world certainly has its charm. I will have to learn more about this, eventually. That will be all. Thank you, Teclis. It's always a pleasure to share a curious mind. Teclis gestured a magical sign and the dome disappeared after. Now then, I'll have the guards escort you, right away. Doomslayer raised a hand and shook his head in response. I believe he knows his way out of here. Hayden answered. Teclis shrugged. Fine by me. Take care, Doomslayer. Dr. Hayden. Loremaster. Doomslayer walked out, leaving the Loremaster alone. Walking his way down the halls, he had taken the leisure to look up the stained glass windows that were framed above him. History written in glass. Unity, division, war, and collapse. The hallmarks of a dying empire. An all too familiar setting. Reminds you of anything? Hayden asked his companion. Doomslayer snorted, dismissively in turn. No offense. You're homesick. We both are. Hayden added, sympathetically. Slayer only sighed after. As he continued, a peculiar but familiar sight caught his eyes. Doomslayer stopped in his tracks. Just around the corner, a furry little critter appeared. It stood up in its hind legs, as if anticipating his approach. Its ears reaching upwards above its head to sense passerbys. The cream color of its fur stuck out against the monotone white corridors and floor. Its sights landed upon Doomslayer. He stood frozen from his place, his heart almost skipping a beat. It was a rabbit. Doomslayer wondered if he was relapsing back to his hallucinations again or not. Hayden's voice snapped him out, however, and placed him back into reality. HMPH. The guards seem to have grown complacent with visitors, have they now? Hayden remarked. The rabbit began slowly hopping its way to the man. Doomslayer knelt down as it got closer. The rabbit stopped and stared hesitantly at him. Slayer reached out a hand slowly towards it, making it back up a bit. However, after a few moments of hesitation, it began sniffing his hand. Sensing no harm from him, the rabbit placed its head on the hand, allowing him to rub its chin a bit. He then scooped it up and carefully cradled it around his arm. The rabbit didn't struggle and remained comfortable in its position. It amused Hayden as he observed the whole scene. Heh. I almost forgot you're very soft on the inside at times. Not really important, but I've scanned the rabbit and it's a female. Though, I doubt her name happens to be Althena. Doomslayer looked up as heard a voice calling. Said voice was from a woman who was calling out for someone. He walked to who it was calling. Just right around where the rabbit was, stood an elven girl. She had been looking opposite of where Doomslayer was, her back in front of him, but based on her voice, he could tell she was worried. The gears kicked in his head and realized she was more than likely looking for the rabbit. Come on, girl, where are you? Alfie? She called out again. Hayden announced their presence. I believe this rabbit is yours, young lady, Hayden said. The elf turned around and Doomslayer recognized her as the girl from the funeral, standing next to the Everqueen. The king's daughter. The princess was startled by the appearance of Doomslayer and then horror as she saw her rabbit in his hands. She stood frozen as they made eye contact. Sensing how intimidating his appearance was, he slowly approached her and gestured her to take the rabbit. The princess looked surprised but carefully took Althena off his hands. She carefully inspected the rabbit, and was relieved to find her unharmed. "Good girl," she said, petting her. Although, she remained sullen as she comforted her pet. "I can't afford to lose you as well." She then looked up at the Marine, who stared silently with a blank expression. It made her a little uncomfortable, but was grateful of him. Thank you," she said, shyly. "I was not expecting such a kind gesture from a strange visitor. Not even when he is a guest of Prince Teclis." "Guests, actually," Hayden corrected, much to the girl's surprise. "And who might you be?" "I am Aeleuthera, daughter of King Finnebur and Alarielle the Everqueen. And I am their Everchild." She then held up her rabbit with pride. "And this little troublemaker is Althena. Or Althea as I like to call her. An honor to stand in your presence. I am Dr. Samuel Hayden, but the man standing before you is Doomslayer. I am merely a stand-in for his voice." "Oh, I didn't know there were two of you. But I am pleased to meet you both," she said, before bowing. All while carefully holding Althena in her arms. "Although, I'm a tad confused, how are you a slayer?" Aeleuthera asked, further inspecting Doomslayer's armor. The Marine seemed puzzled as he tilted his head. "You don't look like a dwarf. I would be expecting one to be shirtless, wield dual axes, and have a fiery mohawk. You're the first one I've known outside dwarf customs to take up the title. Are you perhaps looking up to pay amends through death?" "Quite the opposite, actually. Far too angry to die," Hayden answered. "You'll have to forgive the lack of knowledge, but we have only been here since last night. Although, such information could be quite beneficial. It would help us in the future. Well, I am deeply fascinated with dwarven culture. Father used to talk about much of his travels. I am to partake an expedition to one of their keeps as well. Although, I still have plenty of time packing things so I could pass on what I know. Which is several, in fact. All the more to know, I'll say." "Aeleuthera," another voice called out. This time it was recognizable. Both looked back to where the Everchild had come from. And within view was Tyrion, whose mood turned sour. Again. "Aeleuthera, stay away from him." Tyrion rushed towards the Everchild, and stood in between her and Doomslayer. "What were you doing with her? Explain," Tyrion demanded. Doomslayer kept quiet as usual, but kept a permanent glare at the scowling prince. Hayden proved to be useful as always. "Nothing. We were just leaving. She happened to lose her rabbit and we returned it to her. That's all there is." "It's true, Uncle Tyrion. I just lost Alfie, that's all," Aeleuthera defended. Tyrion never took his eyes off the Slayer, but spoke calmly to the Everchild. "Aeleuthera, go find your mother. She's worried sick." "No need for that, Tyrion." A third voice came in. Standing behind the two Aesir was a far more extravagant sight. Walking towards the three was a figure of high importance. Dressed in a lavish but earthly colored clothing, full of heart emblems and silk, the Everqueen was stunning. Behind her, a semblance of warrior women followed their queen. A steely gaze set upon her brow, yet warmth revealed itself on her lips. This was an authority none shall question, and one that Doomslayer would respect. The Everqueen approached the three with grace and fluidity. "There is no need for hostility, my dear Tyrion," she said, her words calming and lovingly enough to make the prince stand down. "Your brother's guests has stirred up quite a fuss among the court. Although, it is quite some time since we have had a unique visitor. But where are my manners? I am Alarielle, Everqueen of Ulthuan and chosen of Isha. I bid you welcome to our lands, esteemed guests. And there is no need of you to introduce yourselves. I have been informed of your identities. It is a great honor to make your acquaintance, Everqueen." Hayden greeted in respect. Doomslayer, instinctively, bowed to her. This took Tyrion and Hayden by surprise, not expecting the gesture be shown by the Marine. Alarielle, however, smiled in gratitude. "Likewise, Dr. Hayden," Alarielle replied. "I am pleased to meet you both." Tyrion spoke up, after. "My lady, I would be careful with him. He's an anomaly here and I believe it's Bez." Alarielle raised a hand, shutting Tyrion's words in a knot. "There is no need for that, Tyrion. My handmaidens are there to serve their duties. However, I would like to know more about our estranged guests here than anything. I know a particular spot with a wonderful view. Care to join?" Doomslayer took a moment to himself. He thought no harm in it and nodded in acceptance. Alarielle seemed pleased by it. "Excellent," she exclaimed. "Tyrion, I will handle this from now. You may leave us. But it's all right, Tyrion. There is nothing you should worry about. Aeleuthera, come. Yes, mother. Aeleuthera followed closely to the Everqueen, while Doomslayer followed. The handmaidens kept their eyes on him as he tagged along. Only Tyrion was left alone, contemplating in his thoughts. What just happened? The Tower of Cold, Nagaryth. The Witch King stood over the edge of his tower as he stared north of where the greatest threat existed for thousands of years. Chaos. Since the twin-tailed comet, much of what happened recently had been eventful. Last night, out of nowhere, several of his subjects had transformed and twisted into chaos-warped abominations in all of Nagaryth. However, he likely suspected them all to be his mother's cultists. Morthy's pleasure cults were abundant in Drachii society despite his attempts to quash them under his fist. That said, it was satisfying to know the cultists reveal themselves in plain view. His enforcers were more than happy to cut them down and seek their king's approval. Of course, not all of them were cultists. The tyrant of Haggraith, Malus Darkblade, was reported to have gone into a frenzied state in his tower and was on a rampage. Many of its residents had been slaughtered in wake of Malus' madness before several guards and heavy support detained him. Even then, more had lost their lives putting him on ice. In truth, Malekith knew that it was the demon inside Malus, Tsarkan, that caused the incident. Malus was his champion and trusted confidant, and sent him a steady supply of elixirs to keep him at bay with his literal demon. From what he gathered, many had reported of the tyrant screaming incoherent words save for one name. Doomslayer. Malekith was absolutely baffled. A dwarf was what caused this whole hysteria in the first place? This had to be very absurd. He's seen plenty of dwarfen slayers before, but nothing in the way that could be considered a wide-scale threat. Except for maybe that one dwarf named Gotrek he's often heard about. Nonetheless, he ordered his guards to retrieve him so as to investigate further, and even sent Helebrand to personally take him in. He continued to stare at the endless void of the north. The Witch King could sense a looming threat over his people. The end times were upon them. When is another matter on its own. I made it quite clear that you would never set foot in my tower. Morthy. The Witch King needed not turn his back when the Hag sorceress arrived. The faint burst of magic was enough to detect even if scant. He could already feel her dark lips grinning insidiously behind him as he stood impassively by his balcony. My dearest Malekith, is that how you would treat your own mother? She asked sweetly. Her son, however, saw through the deceptions and scoffed her. Your honeyed words work only on the weak-willed. I am not. Speak plainly. Malekith made no effort hiding his disdain for her. Morthy's smile faltered. While not quite angry, she had grown frosty in her expression. Is it ever wrong for a mother to visit her own blood? Perhaps she wanted to mend bridges. She sulked. Maybe offer counsel in this lonely towers. Doubtful they would be of any relief. He quipped. What words you carry. Speak. And I may be forgiving of you for intruding my home. Morthy breathed deeply before sharing. Times are changing, as you have noticed. Morthy started. The worshippers of chaos have revealed themselves so openly in our lands. The Drachii are beginning to question their king's abilities to stamp them out. That king being you. And yet those worshippers happen to be part of your cult, if I'm not mistaken. Malekith remarked. Said followers, in fact, have exposed themselves as weak, gibbering, wastes of skin for unexplained reasons. Shame that you weren't one of them. Malekith turned his back from the view and towards his mother, whose eyes were now slightly twitching, noticeably. She still kept her emotions well hidden, however, despite her infamous temper. Maybe so, but they were weak to be of any fortitude. The Drachii do not allow weakness in our grand kingdom. Those who survived are much stronger. Yes. Like unending parasites. Morthy's grin flattened to a skull. Malekith could not care if it offended her. What else is there that I already have known? Morthy was ready to burst into flames at the indignation, but held her tongue in exchange for a cool head. The hordes of chaos are coming to Nagaryth. But you knew that already, haven't you? Acutely. He admitted. But that is enough to raise the defenses. Though, I sense you are not telling me everything. Mother. Morthy smirked, hinting satisfaction of her familial pride. How insightful of you. But I believe Darkblade would fill you in. By impeccable timing, the guards returned with Malus in tow. He had been shackled and restrained in heavy chains and collared by main-catchers. His mouth had been gagged with a simple iron bar and chain wrapped around it. It was unknown whether he had calmed down or was still possessed. Though, his head had turned white, which was telling. Leading this display was none other than Crone Hellebrand, the Blood Queen of Harganeth herself. Alongside her were the infamous executioners and witch elves, who eyed at the demon-possessed Drachaw with raised weapons at bay. Hellebrand kept her attention towards the Witch King, though slightly soured by the appearance of the hag sorceress herself standing beside him. Despite the mask hiding her features, Malekith could tell the burning anger in her withered lips. He was well aware of their blood-fueled rivalry, but saw it beneath his notice. His attention was on Milas. "My king, it is an honor to have an audience with you. I have brought Milas Darkblade as requested," Hellebrand announced. "How may I further assist you?" "Your service has been valued, Hellebrand," Malekith said in gratitude. "But I have no further need." The Witch King slowly approached the bound Drachaw, with Hellebrand and the rest of her contingent making room for him. As Malekith got closer, the executioners readied their blades in anticipation of any further assault from the possessed Darkblade. The Witch King finally stood over Milas, head laid low at his feet. The eerie stillness made everyone tense save for Malekith, Morathi and Hellebrand. Malekith slowly released the gag from Milas' head and cast it aside. Nothing had happened so far, but the Witch King was ready for any provocations and bound. Within 5 seconds, the possessed Milas launched from his feet at blinding speeds, hair turning white and eyes black as the void. He made an attempt to bite Malekith's neck. The guards holding him down were not quick enough to restrain him and struggled to keep him down due to his enhanced strength. The Witch King, however, was far quicker. In an instant, Malekith grabbed Tsarkan by the neck and held him above. His legs were kicking in the air in a futile attempt to lash out. His only other action was screaming and wailing. And the reports being accurate were an understatement. The Doomslayer has come for chaos. He has returned to reap the gods from their thrones. And the Hellwalker shall rip and tear them and raise their corpses. For he will destroy all who dare oppose him. Flee. All of you. The mad ravings had startled many in the room. Even the executions were every bit disturbed underneath their cold exterior. Hellebrand looked unsettled while Morathi remained steely, though shared her hated enemy's disturbance. Malekith, meanwhile, remained calm and had no issue with the demon's struggles. "They were certainly right about you, demon. You truly have gone mad. Even by the standards of your kind. To hell with your words, puppet." The demon lashed out. "Your status of power is nothing in the face of the destroyer himself. You are but an insect against his might." Seething with anger at the barrage of insults, Malekith slammed the possessed Milas to the floor. The ground shook upon impact, causing many of the guards to topple. Malekith held the demon in place, hand still by his throat. "Dare insult me again and you will meet this. Doomslayer. Sooner," he threatened. Tsarkan stayed silent but bared his teeth in defiance. Malekith grinned under his mask in satisfaction. "Good. Now that's been cleared, I would prefer that you would be quite cooperative and tell me of the one known as Doomslayer." Malekith slowly, and carefully, let go of Tsarkan from his grasp. The demon attempted to stand up as well, but the Witch King stopped him from going any further from the knees. "You will remain on your knees unless told otherwise," Malekith warned. Tsarkan remained compliant, much to everyone's surprise. The Witch King ordered his servants save for Morathi and Hellebrand to leave. They all did as told for fear of invoking his wrath. "Good. Now that's been done with, speak." Tsarkan, like many daemons of Slaanesh, changed to a politeful, if wary, tone. "What is it that you desire to know?" Malekith leaned closer when asked of him.